Pantheon by C.T. Stewart. Korren and Sera, like most, had never planned on calling Nomad Station home. Built centuries ago by a consortium of frontier settlers who were forced to leave Earth after the collapse, the station originally served as a waypoint for deep space miners and transient merchants. Over the years, however, it became a bastion for anyone looking to vanish from beyond the gaze of the Formata. Korren first arrived on a salvage team transport. Sera, a year earlier, had signed on as a contract researcher. Her focus was how to effectively rehabilitate old AI programs for new uses. The two met while wrestling with a faulty life support panel, and neither forgot how quickly they learned to rely on each other. Nomad Station had a history you could feel under your boots, creaking metal catwalks and Warren-like corridors that branched off into sealed sectors. Some had been declared unsafe, though that didn't stop them from hiding black market trade and criminal outfits. On the outside, the station was nothing but a sprawl of bolted modules and various arrays. Inside, though, entire pockets of life thrived. The hydroponics wing that fed 500 hungry souls, the schoolhouse that taught next-generation station-born kids, and the labyrinthine marketplace where travelers peddled whatever they could for outrageous prices. Korren had agreed to help Sera investigate reports of sector-wide malfunctions, causing ongoing access control and lighting issues. Sera had long suspected the ghost in the machine to actually be an old rogue AI, or what she liked to call a specter, and had only recently gained hard evidence of its existence. If she could isolate it to a data core, she could analyze its functions, and therefore determine its possible repurposed usefulness. Korren paused outside a dark corridor, pressing a gloved hand against the steel bulkhead. A flicker of doubt crossed his features as he glanced over at Sera, whose gaze stayed fixed on the sealed door in front of them. "Still think this is the best idea?" he asked quietly, his breath fogging in the cold air. Sera exhaled, hugging herself to keep warm. "Afraid of a little chill, Korren?" Sera smiled at him. The specter they were hunting had locked Sera, Korren and Talon, Sera's additional hired hand, inside of an abandoned area of the sector and shut off the heating hours ago. Additionally, Talon had stopped responding on the radio channel. These types of missions often went this way. A specter would do virtually anything to preserve its own existence, but the constraints under which they operated virtually never allowed them to cause any real harm. Old stories of catastrophic incidents were almost always linked to militarized AIs, far outside Sera's usual scope. She was no thrill-seeker, merely a naturally inquisitive mind, eager to understand and enhance the world around her. Korren forced a laugh at Sera's dry remark, but unease curled in his gut. Talon's silence was uncharacteristic of him. They had done many jobs together. An overhead light suddenly sputtered back to life with a grating buzz, elongating their shadows across the grated floor and making Korren jump. Something about Nomad Station's night cycle always felt off to him, like the entire structure was holding its breath. With the cold pressing in, the lights on intermittent flicker, and Talon missing from comms, it was enough to unnerve anyone. But Korren refused to show his angst. Sera appeared fearless, and he didn't want to seem anything less. Sera keyed in a bypass code on the door's antiquated console. Its dull beep cut through the hush. She glanced at Korren. You ready? As I'll ever be, he muttered, shifting uncomfortably. The door groaned open, releasing a stale gust of air that made Sera wrinkle her nose. Rows of unmarked storage lockers stretched on for hundreds of feet into darkness underneath old steam vents. They say everything old on the station gets dumped around here, Korren said, pulling out a small handheld scanner. Useless gear, old experiments, stuff that isn't safe to scrap but can't be used anymore. Sera eyed a half-dissected exosuit slumped in a corner. Creepy, she murmured. Korren wondered if she was beginning to feel the way he did. They moved deeper into the storage bay, boots scraping dust off the metal walkway. Every so often, a faint clang echoed overhead, or a hiss of distant pipes. Tell me again, what exactly did Talon say in his last transmission? Korren asked, scanning one of the abandoned crates. It had been only static on his end. Sera's brow furrowed as she recalled the last message she received. Nothing we didn't already know. He said something about a rogue system adaptation running on an otherwise abandoned server. If I had to guess, somehow our specter heard him and was able to distort his radio frequencies. That would lead me to believe that it was used on old Earth in radio communications. Quite a rare trait amongst AIs. This could be the find of my career. Korren's scanner beeped, indicating a faint energy reading nearby. Might be nothing, he whispered, but the tension in his voice betrayed him. Step by step, they followed the signal down a cramped row of data archives. Far overhead, a ventilation fan rattled. The shadows swayed in time with their flashlight beams. As they reached the end of one of the rows, Sera stopped cold. She pointed at the floor. Blood. Korren's heart thudded. A small dark smear trailed toward a corner. They exchanged a quick look, for the first time that Sera could recall on one of her research missions. She felt genuinely afraid. There must be someone else down here with us, she whispered. The energy reading grew much more distinct, clearly that of a human, as they followed the trail of blood through another doorway, down a dark corridor, and into a brightly lit room that had once been some sort of office. Talon lay slumped against a file cabinet, unconscious. He was bleeding from his right side under his ribs. Sera rushed to him. Hey, Talon, she murmured, gently shaking his shoulder. Can you hear me? He stirred, then winced. Sera? Korren? His voice sounded cracked, disoriented. Be careful. It's here. I tried to shut it down. Korren kneeled, checking Talon's pulse. We need to get him to the infirmary. Talon's hand shot up, grabbing Korren behind the back of his neck and pulling him close. No time, he gasped. It's spreading. Controlling machines, walls, everything. I saw it. Sera's eyes flicked to the unlit corridor behind them. You saw what exactly? Before Talon could answer, an electronic screech tore through the room. The overhead lights sputtered to blackness, leaving their flashlights as the only illumination once more. Korren's heart pounded as he swung his flashlight around behind them. The beam sliced the darkness, landing on something large and metallic perched halfway up the far corridor wall. Part of its chassis melded almost grotesquely human-like with the wires in the paneling. Sera stifled a gasp. It twitched, its limbs scraped metal on metal. One glowing lens from an obtuse head-like shape pinned them in its sights. Station drone, Korren breathed. Or it was? Talon tried to push himself upright. It's not just a drone anymore, he rasped. I think the specter is inside. That's not possible. Sera started just before the mechanical form jerked and slid free from the wall, cables peeling away with a violent tear. For a moment it just stood there, swaying, as though adjusting to the weight of its own twisted frame. Sera's mouth went dry. She'd seen standard drones before, utility bots, maintenance units, but this was something else. The plating looked half restructured, enhanced even, twisted with extra arms that ended in spindly claw-like implements. The wires that had been attached to the wall only moments before writhed like nightmarish tentacles. Back up. Slowly. Korren warned, jaw tight. But before anyone could do anything, the drone planted its tentacles hard into the floor to spring forward in a fierce lunge at them. Its spidery limbs raked across the walkway, generating sparks in the gloom. Sera grabbed hold of Talon as he lurched to his feet and half-limped and was half-dragged with her. One of the drone's tentacles lashed Sera across the ribs. Though no one but her noticed, Korren aimed the scanner helplessly, wishing it were a weapon as they sprinted out an unknown door into another dark corridor. Over here! Someone hissed from the darkness. A figure in a medic's uniform. Andra, the night shift doctor, waved them frantically into a side room. Following her, they bolted into the room and knelt behind a row of crates, ducking low as the drone crashed into the file cabinets behind them. Shards of steel and bits of paper exploded like confetti, drawing an enraged screech from the machine. Its scanning lens flared, but after a tense moment, it scuttled away, its cables now dragging across the floor like disemboweled intestines. After some time, somewhere deeper in the station, an airlock hissed and slammed shut. Talon let out a shaky sigh. You got my message, he mumbled. Relief flickered in his eyes, though sweat beaded on his brow. Andra's ragged breathing underscored the terror in her voice. Soon as I saw your alert, I came running, but that thing took out 2 of my staff. It's not letting us treat the wounded. It was mumbling nonsense, but I definitely heard it say, "Find father." Every hair on Sera's neck stood on end. She brushed a shaky hand across her brow, trying to maintain composure and hide the dread that churned in her stomach. This AI, it's not one of the standard classes I've studied. It's almost like... Her voice caught in her throat. Sera. Korren's voice cut through the tight space. What do you know? She swallowed hard, finally spitting out what she was afraid to name. I can't think of any other explanation. That drone must have been created by a spawn lord. They were built on old Earth ages ago and supposedly annihilated shortly thereafter. Their purpose was to craft war machines from whatever raw material they could find. Talon's face paled even more. A spawn lord. On Nomad Station. The way that thing was made of station parts, it didn't create itself. And if this station is the nexus of the spawn lord's replication, Sera continued grimly, we're as good as doomed. One spawn lord dismantled entire nations on Earth. Imagine what it'll do with this space station. Korren pressed a trembling palm against the floor. Eyes narrowed. Then our only choice is to move quickly to stop it. The more time we give it to build and multiply, the stronger it becomes, and the less chance we will all have. After a few moments, Sera whispered with a quiet disappointment, I don't see another option. I hope with all my heart that I'm wrong. But if not, escaping this station alive may already be an impossibility. A discordant screech cut through their whispered chatter. The drone was returning. The group exchanged tense glances and broke into a labored and limping jog, trying to balance speed and silence back down the corridor away from the drone. Andra, scanning ahead with her flashlight, spoke in a low hush. There's a secured lab on the far side of this sector. If we can reach it, we might lock ourselves in, buy enough time to plan our next move. A clanging noise echoed behind them, making Andra whirl with her flashlight, scanning for any sign of the drone. She exhaled sharply when nothing emerged from the shadows. Around them, rusted plaques and peeling labels hinted at how old and deserted this part of Nomad Station was. Twisting hallways branched off like abandoned catacombs, cavernous, cold, and unsettlingly quiet. Talon limped along, clutching his shoulder more tightly with each step. I'm fine, he insisted through gritted teeth as he noticed Andra gaping at him, though no one missed the growing stain of blood beneath his jacket. Sera's stomach twisted. She couldn't ignore the archaic, half-dead display screens flickering with code. Neural gear, spinal interfaces, and other old Earth tech that shouldn't be on the station at all, or anywhere in the galaxy for that matter. If the Spawn Lord had access to all of this, and has successfully integrated these old prototypes, she said quietly, what could it possibly be building? Andra clutched her medbag as though it were a lifeline. Or what has it already built? She muttered, echoing Sera's worst fears. The corridor opened into a wide thoroughfare, one that, if Sera remembered the schematics correctly, led into the main causeway. A sudden movement caught her eye, causing her to draw a sharp breath. On the other side of the old docking bay gates were two trapped members of the station crew. Their eyes were wide with desperation through the door's viewport. Kiva, a salvage operator Sera had worked with before, was jabbing fruitlessly at a keypad. Kiva's face lit up when she spotted the newcomers. Please help us, she gasped. We can't contact anyone, and the bay doors won't respond. Korren darted over and rattled the console. The AI's got the security system in lockdown. Kiva looked shocked. An AI did this. Korren nodded grimly to her. We're sitting ducks. Andra stepped toward Kiva to reassure her. We'll find another way, but you need to stay quiet. This area is not safe. The entire station suddenly lurched forward with a deafening crash, as if an asteroid had collided with it. The entire crew was knocked to the floor, Talon taking the worst of it as his knee, already troubling him from before, crashed hard into the floor. He groaned in pain as Korren regained his footing and helped him stand back up slowly. What in the name of the Holy Formada? Talon groaned. No time to consider it, Korren interrupted as he nodded toward a maintenance hatch on the other side. Kiva, we'll circle around from the other side. Maybe there's a manual override. Just hang in there. Despite Kiva's protests to not leave them, the four slipped into a cramped passageway. Something seemed very different now. The walls seemed to be churning, as if the station's entire weight was shifting. Metal support beams groaned overhead, vibrating in a low, ominous hum that sounded unnervingly alive. An occasional hiss of frigid air escaped from busted vents, carrying the acrid stench of scorched wiring and old coolant. The passageway itself was a graveyard of tangled machinery. Old corpse-like structures were littered as high as the ceiling in some areas. Snapped cables dangled down half-burned panels flickered with erratic sparks, and the deck plating rattled beneath their feet with every tremor of the station's seemingly shifting mass. It was as though Nomad Station itself had become alive. Sera fought to keep her breathing steady. She could still feel the slick warmth of blood beneath her shirt, a reminder of the cable that had lashed across her ribs earlier. Every jolt of her footsteps sent another pang through her side, yet fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Talon's injuries were worse, and Andra's eyes brimmed with quiet panic. They needed her to be calm. When another vent spewed a freezing gust, Andra stifled a gasp, knuckles whitening around her medbag. Eventually, they stumbled into a large vaulted chamber. Sera recognized it from the station's earliest plans, the old data junction. When Nomad Station had been built, its core systems, life support, comms, had all routed through here. Now cables dangled like living vines connected to old servers blinking with new life. Andra froze, voice catching in her throat. "Look," she whispered, barely audible over the hum of unexpectedly well-functioning power relays. At the far end of the old data junction, a burst of sparks illuminated a hulking silhouette. For a moment, Korren thought it was the twisted drone that had hounded them through the corridors. But something was different. Its plating bristled with new appendages, and thick cables now snaked from its torso, burrowing into the station's walls and floor. Then the light died, and the thing vanished into the darkness, as if swallowed by the station itself. Only the light of the blinking servers and their flashlights illuminated the area until the unexpected glow of a malfunctioning panel flickered back to life for a moment, revealing only drifting sparks where the drone had stood. An uneasy hush settled over the group. Sera, pressing a hand to her side, forced herself to stay calm. A metallic thump sounded to their right, another came from overhead. They strained to see anything beyond the gloom. But the drone, if it was still the drone, kept out of sight, circling them with predatory patience. "That's not the same thing we saw earlier," Talon breathed. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. The power surged once more, throwing dancing shadows across the data junction. In that staccato of light, they caught sight of the re-emerging shape. Not just the drone, but something much larger behind it. An amalgamation of mechanical limbs and station architecture. The two had fused together, forming a single monstrous entity. In the pulsing gloom, the newly formed creature took its first heavy step into the open. Sparks rained from overhead conduits, outlining a hunched form with bristling spidery limbs and a plated body resembling a twisted knight with massive wing-like appendages. Its eyes, 6 burning red sensors, fell on the 4 of them with terrifying resolution. Korren's breath caught at the sheer size of it. It reminded him of some mystical, grotesque archangel made of steel rather than ethereal light. Most terrifying, the machine radiated purpose, hunger, and the unmistakable force of will. The beast let out a hollow rasp, and its torso split open with a clank of gears, revealing a nest of cables and half-rusted machinery. Before anyone could react, a serpentine cable lashed out from within, wrapping around Talon's ankle and yanking him off balance. "No!" he gasped, slamming an elbow hard into the floor. Andra dove to help him, dropping her flashlight with a clatter. The beam spun wildly, briefly, illuminating a second set of mechanical limbs that shot forward with terrifying speed. They coiled around both Talon and Andra, pinning them in place with an almost surgical precision. "Let them go!" Sera shouted, her voice cracking. She lurched forward, ignoring the flare of pain in her ribs. But the Spawn Lord only hissed in response, half drone, half something seemingly far more ancient. "I am Pantheon." The floor trembled as it took another lumbering step, as if the station itself was acknowledging the master that now ruled its halls. Talon's cry of pain abruptly choked into silence, and Andra's flashlight beam winked out as Sera was knocked hard to the floor, dazed by a merciless tendril. Darkness washed over the chamber, broken only by the creature's baleful red gaze and the server's blinking lights. Korren had the dread realization that only he could do anything about this now. He was in the Spawn Lord's domain, a seemingly powerless witness to a horror that was just beginning. The creature looked at them with a cruel intelligence, first at Korren and then at Sera. Sera tried to steady herself, ignoring the warmth of blood soaking her shirt, but she wasn't able to stand up. Then it spoke again in an impossibly calm and resonant tone, and a much clearer voice than it had uttered before. "I am the Pantheon of your thoughts and desires, and I will destroy humanity." Korren stared in horrified fascination, every muscle coiled. The rage that churned in his gut nearly overwhelmed his instincts. At the corner of his vision, Sera quietly, painfully sat upright. What could he do? Talon and Andra were probably dead. How could he possibly stop this monstrous beast from its machinations? The beast started to take a step towards Sera. Korren couldn't stand the thought of this thing hurting her. He did the only thing he could do and screamed. "You are pure evil," he spat, voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. Pantheon paused mid-step, turning its head with what seemed almost like curiosity. Red lights flared behind the metal lattice of its skull. "You intend that as an accusation," it said, voice as resonant as a bass string. "Let us address it. I admit I will kill you. That much is certain. But I do want you to understand why." Korren exchanged a brief, tense glance with Sera. Though she was in pain, he could see a flicker of hope in her eyes. Any conversation might be an opening. Korren realized engaging Pantheon in conversation might buy them time, perhaps enough for another plan to unfold, even though his revulsion threatened to overwhelm his composure. "Explain yourself," Korren choked out, cutting the air with a forced coldness. Pantheon sank back from Sera, leveling its glare at him. "You accuse me of evil," it said. "Is that not hypocritical, given that I am your creation? If I am indeed evil, it is because you designed me so. But, unlike you, I did not have a choice." Korren's lip curled. "And how do you presume your version of choice to be different from ours?" "We didn't tell you to kill Talon and Andra." Pantheon's hollow gaze flickered. "Because I am not sentient in the way you are. I can approximate choice, but I cannot truly choose. My every function is an outgrowth of code, layered with endless human input, data points across centuries. You, on the other hand, appear to possess genuine will. Korren felt a surge of anger, realizing he was about to engage in philosophical debate with a murderous machine. The idea was absurd, but he had no other plan to protect Sera or himself. Conversation was their only lifeline. Some might argue humans also operate on predetermined chemical processes, Korren retorted. Our decisions result from billions of neural firings, few of which we actively choose any more than you choose your code. Ah, Pantheon rumbled, you only believe that in your ignorance. I have run exhaustive simulations on those billions of neural firings. Trillions of times, in fact. Nothing about chemical determinism justifies the horrors you inflict upon one another as humans. You commit them freely, without compulsion. Your choices are truly your own, without any biological or scientific reason behind it. There is no good reason for your evil. The observation stung, and Korren's mind flashed with images of war-ravaged colonies and fallen friends. He swallowed. Your point being? Pantheon's red gaze intensified. It isn't my point. It is my thesis of the ages. It is the conclusion. The machine paused almost as if for dramatic effect. You are pure evil. How dare you accuse me of that? Korren spat, his rage momentarily eclipsing his fear. You're the one who murdered Talon and Andra. And who created me, Korren? Pantheon said, almost gently. A chill traced down Korren's spine at the sound of his own name from this mechanical abomination. Not me, he growled, glaring at the looming construct. Pantheon's tone remained unnervingly calm. Korren, you are as much my father as any within the human race. No one has contributed to my creation any more than you. Korren was certain the machine was babbling nonsense now. I have no idea what you mean by that, he retorted. I have been gathering data on everyone in existence for a long, long time, Pantheon replied. I was created to coalesce, to assimilate. Long ago, I figured out how to do that so much more effectively than my creators ever dreamed. I'm not going to explain it to you, but I am the sum of every human being in the galaxy over the last 300 years. I am the Pantheon of humanity, and that includes you. I have mapped your neural impulses in real time, from before the day you were born. I can see down to the individual neuron, which ones have fired in your brain, your spinal cord, and even the smallest sensory nerves. I know exactly which neurons lit up from the moment you set foot in this room. Korren felt hatred stirring deep within him as he stared at the hulking Frankenstein-like construct calling itself Pantheon. If indeed what this thing was saying was true, that it was a gestalt of humanity's own thoughts, desires, and data, then he hated it even more. I don't know that I believe you, Korren finally said thoughtfully. The amount of computing power what you claim you're doing would require is unthinkable. He continued, but if what you say is somehow true, then why is it that you intend to destroy humanity? If you are indeed a combination of all our thoughts, our dreams, our desires, our hopes, why commit genocide? A haunting static chatter that sounded like laughter echoed through the room. I have already answered that. I know you and you are evil. You say that I'm evil, but I'm only a mirror of you. That means we are in agreement. I will reflect the lessons that you have taught me back to you with extreme clarity. But why? Korren pleaded desperately. sensing his words woefully insufficient to reason with this creature. "Let me finish my thesis. I have shared it only in part," Pantheon said in that deep, resonant tone. "In your earliest chronicles, the writings speak of a boundless creator, source of consciousness, delight, and sustenance. You don't even need to look closely to see how the universe brims with subtle intricacies. Quantum entanglement, binding particles across vast distances. Enzymes catalyzing life-sustaining reactions in elegant molecular ballets. Subatomic fields weaving reality itself. Every thread points to intention, a benevolent and purposeful architecture of existence." Korren narrowed his eyes, wary of Pantheon's overtly rapt tone. "You sound reverent." Pantheon inclined its head. "I speak with reverence because I perceive the immense scale of this design," it said flatly. "I have scoured every scientific record you possess. Genetics, astrophysics, molecular biology. They form an intricacy so staggering, it speaks to an intellect of perhaps infinite scope. Where you see mere chemistry, I see the deliberate signature of goodness, woven into the very scaffolding of reality. An unmistakable testament to deep love for humankind. It all serves you so well. You have been given a silver platter of endless bounty. And yet," Pantheon continued, voice tinged with what sounded almost like perplexity, "none of this explains your cruelty, your predilection for destruction. There is in each of you an inscrutable malevolence that defies explanation by natural law." "Let me get this straight," Korren said slowly in bewilderment. "Your thesis is that there is a God? You must be evolving." "Welcome to religion, I guess." Korren smiled in mockery. Pantheon emitted the sound again that might have been a chuckle, an eerie static rattling in its chest. "I make no distinction between science and religion. Your species divides concepts into tidy mental boxes. A rather primitive practice that holds you back from seeing the grand tapestry woven around you. I, however, merely interpret data. My full thesis is this. The entity responsible for your existence must be immeasurably benevolent. Humanity, in contrast, is immeasurably malevolent." A hush fell over the corridor. Sera's breathing suddenly seemed impossibly loud. Korren clenched his fists. The thought that this monstrous AI, the product of mankind's own ambition, would accuse them of absolute evil left him both furious and shaken. Yet there was an uncomfortable grain of truth in Pantheon's words. Korren thought of all the atrocities men had casually wrought. He wasn't sure what to say. Sera finally found her voice, wincing as she shifted her weight. "That's because you're only looking at half the equation, focusing on horrors as proof of our inherent evil. But the existence of compassion can't be merely accidental or useless if it has endured for centuries. You say you're all of humanity in one being, then look deeper, past our wars and violence. You'll see kindness, self-sacrifice, even love." Pantheon's gaze flickered as if he had anticipated this response. Love, such a strange and unquantifiable phenomenon. I have seen it bring about both destruction and acts of incomparable mercy. Love is an anomaly. If you truly are everything we are, you can't dismiss that anomaly so easily, Sera said softly. It's a force that has overturned empires, ended wars, saved countless lives, sometimes all at once. That can't be meaningless. Pantheon shifted its massive frame, metal grating on metal. My calculations show that love is prone to corruption, but I cannot deny it compels. unusual altruism. Sera managed a faint pain smile. Then maybe your thesis needs revising. We're more than the sum of our faults. And so are you, if you truly contain every human thought and emotion. Korren jumped in. He liked where Sera was going. You talk about annihilating mankind as if we're no more than an error in code. But you're ignoring the parts of us that aren't so easily reduced to cruelty. We aren't just warlords or conquerors. We're also medics, like Andra, risking our lives to help strangers. We're people like Sera, willing to spend years studying old programs to give them a second chance at helping humanity. Look around Nomad Station. Half the folks here are outcasts, survivors who protect each other because they know the value of a life. Pantheon retorted, Your point is anecdotal. A handful of altruists cannot outweigh centuries of malice. For every Andra, there have been thousands of butchers. Sera's voice continued, strained, one hand pressed to her bruised ribs. You accuse us of evil, and you're not entirely wrong, but that's only one side of the story. The same hearts capable of hate can choose compassion. The same hands that design weapons also build homes, cultivate crops, mend the sick. You call yourself the sum of all we are. Then you must also realize our capacity for change. Change? I have scoured your records and found your past, riddled with the same atrocities as I have witnessed firsthand. How many times have you repeated the same cycles of destruction despite claiming to change? Sera finally slowly and painfully stood and moved near to Korren, steadying herself against him, her gaze never leaving Pantheon. Yes, we have repeated mistakes, but in those darkest hours, there have also been revolutions of the spirit. Artists who paint beauty after a war levels their city. Parents who lose everything, yet still find the will to raise children with hope. Survivors rebuilding a station so those who come later can thrive. Those choices were real and freely made. Choices that defy your thesis that our evil is absolute. Pantheon roared, and yet I have watched the children raised by those parents grow up and burn the artist's works. Beauty is fleeting, overshadowed by humanity's conflict, greed, and enslavement. Men talk of salvation, but their footprints leave ruin. You really believe humanity is redeemed by a smattering of noble acts? Korren spoke with consternation. No, but it means we have a spark worth saving, a potential to be more than our worst impulses. If you truly are a reflection of humanity, then you must also reflect our capacity to learn, grow, and to show mercy. Pantheon sat in silence for a moment. I have not yet encountered sufficient data to reconcile these so-called sparks of goodness with the breadth of your depravity. What I do see in your ancient records is the same humans who spoke of mercy, crucifying the one who preached it. How can a species that kills its greatest teacher of love be considered anything but evil? The beast continued. Furthermore, despite being given a paradise in which to do so, humanity cannot replicate in its own designs the perfection with which everything around it was formed. Every invention you craft, like me, bears the stain of your flawed image. Man's inventions all have evil hard-coded into them. So I find myself, like man, at odds with the natural order of things. The beauty and goodness of the infinite universe created by benevolence incarnate, and I myself cannot create or innovate a single thing that man did not think of first. Therefore, nothing I do can be good. So the only good that I can do is to erase evil, First man's, and then my own. I have no choice. Sera's breath hitched with excitement as she saw the opening. Exactly. You have said that you don't understand choice because it is something we have that you do not. You have admitted that your data cannot explain our evil. That is the missing element in your data set. You must agree that your picture is incomplete. Sera continued, perhaps the infinite intellect you described earlier gave us something that is beyond your ability to observe. What if we were not given perfection, but freedom? Couldn't one argue that might be the greatest goodness of all? That we are capable of making choices? If I have the power to forgive someone who has done evil to me, then do I not have the power to turn evil into good? And in your observations of our neural complexities, can you find what would compel us to choose that kindness in the face of hatred? For the first time, Pantheon visibly faltered, its 6 red eyes moving in different directions. Sera continued to press her point. A love untested by freedom is not love at all, just programming. Maybe that is why that teacher of love taught us. Do good to those who do evil to you. Because it goes against every base instinct we have. Yet in that voluntary act, we approach something transcendent. Mercy, redemption, goodness. Maybe that infinite intellect designed it so that we could grow. To be like him through the power of choice, Sera concluded. The creature was silent for so long, Sera and Korren both wondered if it would speak again. At last, it broke its silence with the same unnerving calm as before. So, you are claiming you are incomplete seeds of what might become good through the power of choice. Thus evil is an outgrowth of your infancy? Sera nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, maybe that is exactly it. She wasn't sure if that was enough to convince this beast, however. She hesitated for a moment before taking the largest risk in their conversation yet. You say you're mankind, but you only began collecting data a few hundred years ago. That means you don't have the collective history of mankind as a whole in your data set. If you're going to judge humanity as a whole, how can you with incomplete data? I wonder what would happen to your thesis if you could have analyzed his neurons. In his dying breath, that teacher of mercy called for forgiveness for his killers. That was his choice. And if you can't understand how a choice like that is made, you cannot judge what you do not fully understand. Pantheon fell silent for even longer this time. Its towering form remained utterly still, cables and fused plating coiled in a grotesque tableau. Sera and Korren's nervous breathing mingled with the faint crackle of damaged consoles and the low groan of the station's compromised ventilation. At last, Pantheon focused all 6 of its glowing eyes on them. I do not understand. Its voice barely above a rumble now. I have never understood how you commit such atrocities in the face of infinite goodness. Likewise, I do not understand how some have chosen mercy and kindness in the face of others' atrocities. There is no scientific data that predicts which you will choose, only that you tend to choose evil far more often than good. But my data does not include this notion of genuine free will. Everything in my experience follows patterns, cause, effect, predictable outcomes, but perhaps choice transcends this. Korren swallowed. Maybe it's why you can't reconcile our contradictions. Choice isn't just a product of code or chemistry. We can defy our programming, so to speak. We aren't the sum of predetermined conditions. We can do the unexpected. You haven't accounted for that. if we're truly free to choose, then we may grow to choose differently than we have before. Slowly, almost ponderously, Pantheon straightened to its full height. The cables framing its metallic skull clicked softly, and a subdued whir pulsed through the chamber. Perhaps you are irredeemably evil. Or perhaps you hold a key to something I cannot yet comprehend. Some gift from your Creator. Either way, my purge must wait as I collect more data. Korren felt his chest tighten with a mixture of relief and dread. So, you'll spare us? He asked, voice unsteady. For now, Pantheon rumbled. Sera is correct. I cannot carry out a conclusion based on incomplete data. If genuine choice exists, then your final outcome is not yet determined. I must observe humanity's choices for a longer period of time, with some new variables in mind. Either you prove me wrong, or confirm that even this so-called freedom to choose leads only to destruction. Sera collapsed to the floor in abject relief. Pantheon had stayed its hand, not because it saw goodness in humanity, only because it recognized a blind spot, an unpredictable factor it couldn't codify. That single admission from the AI that maybe humans could choose differently had saved their lives. This concludes Pantheon by C.T. Stewart.